Y'all want to harass me over it.
As the encounter peaked, he was handcuffed and placed in the cruiser, raising questions about the motives behind his arrest. Was it a response to his challenging authority or an attempt to intimidate him? The officer's actions warranted scrutiny, sparking concerns about possible abuse of power.
The street is quiet enough that small movements matter. A bicycle rests nearby. A cruiser sits where it doesn't need to sit. No lights, no urgency, just presence. The kind that presses without touching. The officer's stance is relaxed, but the space around it tightens. Control has not been announced yet. It's being tested. The man does not move much. He doesn't pace. He doesn't fidget. His stillness creates contrast. In encounters like this, motion is often interpreted as intent. He gives none. That absence becomes the first problem. Authority expects reaction. It feeds on it. Calm can feel like refusal. The initial exchange feels ordinary on the surface. Words pass, polite enough. But the order of things is already skewed. The cruiser blocks the road instead of pulling aside. That choice matters. It turns a conversation into a boundary. It narrows the scene before anyone admits a scene exists. A request is made that sounds casual. Identification, a name, something small. Something that usually ends the interaction. The man declines. Not loudly, not dramatically. He doesn't argue yet. He simply doesn't give what's asked. That denial doesn't stop the moment. It changes its direction. From here, options begin to close. Not because of what's happening, but because of what isn't. There is no clear accusation, no specific concern, nothing concrete to resolve. Without that, the encounter can't end cleanly. It can only stretch. The officer explains the stop in broad strokes, vague language, words that float without landing. They don't accuse, but they imply. Suspicion without shape, the kind that can't be disproven because it hasn't been defined. The man listens. He doesn't interrupt. He doesn't fill the silence. Silence becomes another problem. Authority often relies on momentum, quick compliance, a brief exchange that reinforces roles. This moment resists that rhythm. Every pause feels longer than it is. The lack of resolution starts to feel like defiance, even though nothing has changed. The officer repeats the request. The tone shifts slightly, firmer, less conversational, still controlled. Control doesn't need volume, it needs repetition. Each request adds weight, not clarity. The man's refusal remains unchanged, calm, even, predictable. A second officer arrives. The dynamic changes immediately. Space tightens again. Two uniforms refract responsibility. No single voice owns the decision now. Shared authority often feels safer to exercise. It spreads consequence. The conversation circles. Not forward, not back, just around. Each pass erodes patience. Not because time is short, but because certainty is absent. When authority cannot justify itself quickly, it often compensates by asserting itself slowly. The man asks for clarity. What is this about? What justifies this moment? The answers do not settle, they accumulate. Explanations stack without aligning. That misalignment creates friction. Friction invites escalation. There is a brief opening where this could end. A moment where someone could step back, let the silence breathe, reset the encounter. It passes unnoticed. No one takes it. The space closes again. The second officer's presence emboldens the stance. Not overtly, subtly. Posture shifts. Distance shortens. The conversation is no longer exploratory. It's directional. The direction points inward, toward control. The man remains still. That stillness now reads differently. What was calm becomes resistance. What was patience becomes challenge. Not because his behavior changed, but because the context did. Authority dislikes unresolved encounters. They linger. They suggest limits. This one has lingered too long. A decision begins forming before it's spoken. You can feel it in the way explanations stop evolving. They repeat instead. The words no longer seek agreement, they seek compliance. The gap between those two things widens quietly. No one names it, no one needs to. When the officer says he is not free to leave, the sentence lands heavier than it sounds. It redraws the scene. What was a discussion becomes a hold. What was optional becomes imposed. The justification still hasn't sharpened. It doesn't need to now. The man acknowledges the shift without reacting to it. He notes it. That alone is enough to push the moment forward. Once detention is declared, retreat becomes difficult. Backing down would require admitting the line was crossed too soon. The presence of multiple officers creates a sense of inevitability. Not because of threat, but because of inertia. Decisions made in groups rarely reverse themselves quickly. Each person waits for another to move first. The street remains quiet. Cars pass at a distance. Life continues just outside the frame. Inside it, the range of possible outcomes narrows. Not dramatically, gradually, almost politely. The man's refusal is no longer about identification. It has become symbolic, whether he wants it to or not. Authority interprets symbols. It reacts to what they represent, not what they mean. Another request is made. The tone suggests finality without stating it. This is the moment where cooperation would smooth everything over. It's offered like a courtesy, a last chance framed as convenience. He does not take it. That refusal lands differently now. It doesn't stall the encounter anymore. It accelerates it. The decision that had been forming quietly steps closer to the surface. No one announces what's about to happen. They don't need to. Body language does the work. Positions adjust. Hands move. The space around the man tightens one last time. The moment control shifts is rarely loud. It's often procedural. A simple action that changes everything that follows. This is where the encounter stops being uncertain. The handcuffs come out without ceremony. No raised voices, no sudden rush, just a practiced motion. The kind learned through repetition. Metal clicks softly. The sound is small, but it carries. Once restraint is applied, the narrative changes. Not officially, practically. From this point forward, every action must justify the one before it. The encounter locks itself into a sequence that is difficult to interrupt. The man's posture changes slightly as his hands are guided back. Not in resistance, in adjustment. He complies with the physical movement even as he maintains his verbal position. That distinction matters, though it won't be acknowledged. The officer's focus narrows. Their attention shifts from conversation to procedure. Steps follow steps, each one rehearsed, each one easier to complete than to question. Procedure offers comfort. It removes ambiguity. The cruiser door opens, the interior waits. This space is designed to contain. Once someone is placed inside it, the encounter becomes official, regardless of how it began. The door closes with a final sound. The outside world dulls. From here, explanations become retrospective. Reasons are offered after actions are taken. This order reversal is subtle but powerful. It reframes the encounter as justified by its outcome rather than its origin. The man continues to speak calmly. His tone does not rise. That calmness now contrasts sharply with his position. Restrained, seated, contained. Calm inside confinement reads differently than calm in the open. The officer's language shifts again. Words like just trying and doing our job appear. These phrases smooth the edges of what has already happened. They soften without undoing. There is a suggestion that compliance could still ease things, that cooperation now might change the trajectory. This suggestion arrives late, after restraint, after placement. It functions less as an option and more as a justification for what's already been done. The man does not change his position. He doesn't escalate. He doesn't concede. His refusal is consistent. Consistency in this context becomes stubbornness in the eyes of authority. The scene outside the cruiser remains controlled. No crowd forms, no spectacle develops. That absence reinforces the officer's confidence. Without witnesses reacting, the moment feels contained, manageable. Inside the cruiser, time stretches differently. Minutes feel longer. Silence presses. The man's presence is now passive by design. The system prefers compliance through containment rather than persuasion. Radio chatter breaks the quiet. Codes, locations, neutral language. It places the encounter into a larger framework. This is no longer an isolated moment. It's logged, categorized, filed. The officers outside confer briefly. Their conversation is not heated. It doesn't need to be. Decisions have already been enacted. Now, they only need to be supported. The original reason for the stop feels distant, almost irrelevant. What remains is the fact of detention. Once that exists, it demands justification. The system works backward to supply it. Authority often frames escalation as necessity rather than choice. Each step is presented as the only available option, even when alternatives existed moments earlier. Those alternatives disappear from memory quickly. The man's earlier calm is now cited implicitly as obstinance. His refusal to provide information becomes the focus, not the absence of a clear accusation, not the initial vagueness. The narrative simplifies itself. This simplification is crucial. Complex beginnings are inconvenient. Simple endings are easier to defend. The encounter reshapes itself accordingly. The cruiser remains parked where it began, blocking space, occupying the street. Its presence now feels justified by the outcome. The blockage no longer raises questions. It feels earned. The officer's demeanor stays professional. That professionalism is important. It signals normalcy. It suggests this is routine. Routine actions rarely invite scrutiny. The man's rights are not debated openly anymore. They don't need to be. The physical reality has overtaken the theoretical one. What matters now is custody. As time passes, the possibility of reversal diminishes. Each minute spent detained reinforces the decision to detain. Ending the encounter without consequence would require admitting error. Systems resist that. The tone remains calm throughout. This calmness masks the severity of the situation. There is no chaos to point to, no disorder to blame, just procedure unfolding. The man asks questions, not rhetorical, practical. They do not alter the scene. Questions without leverage rarely do. The leverage has shifted entirely. At this stage, the encounter is no longer about the initial interaction. It's about precedent, about whether authority can disengage after asserting control. The answer in practice is almost always no. The officer's language emphasizes cooperation. Yet cooperation now means accepting what has already happened. It is no longer a mutual exchange. It's a one-way expectation. The cruiser becomes a symbol of the encounter's finality. Its closed door separates phases, before and after, free and contained, conversation and custody. What began as a vague concern has become a full stop in someone's day. Not because of new information, but because of accumulated decisions. The moment has passed where this could end quietly. What remains is resolution through process, paperwork, reports, justifications written later. The street outside returns to its normal rhythm. Cars move. Pedestrians pass. The disruption blends back into the environment. The encounter leaves little trace except for the person inside the cruiser. Authority has reasserted itself. Not dramatically, successfully. Time dulls urgency. Inside the cruiser, the man waits. Waiting is an under-examined form of control. It requires nothing from the authority exercising it. It places the burden entirely on the detained. Outside, the officers move with practiced ease. Their posture is relaxed again. The tension that marked the earlier exchange has dissipated. Control has been established. There is no need to press further. Conversations continue, but they are administrative now. Names, numbers, status updates. The language is neutral, almost sterile. It distances the speakers from the weight of the situation. The man's earlier insistence on clarity now feels out of place in this environment. The setting itself answers his questions without speaking. He is here because he is here. The reasoning has become secondary. Authority often relies on environment to do its work. A uniform signals legitimacy. A cruiser signals custody. A closed door signals finality. Together, they remove the need for persuasion. The longer the man remains detained, the more the encounter reshapes itself in memory. What was uncertain becomes framed as necessary. What was optional becomes inevitable. Time smooths the rough edges. There is no visible malice in the officer's actions. That absence complicates the story. This is not a scene driven by anger. It's driven by adherence to a process that rewards escalation over restraint. The man's calm persists. It does not earn him relief. Calm, in this context, is not leverage. It is simply noted and moved past. The system does not adjust itself to demeanor. It responds to compliance. Eventually, decisions are made about next steps. Release, citation, documentation. These outcomes matter, but they do not undo what has already occurred. The detention stands on its own. When the man is finally allowed to leave, the transition is understated. No apology, no acknowledgement of error, just a return to the sidewalk. Freedom resumes without ceremony. This lack of closure is intentional, even if unspoken. It preserves authority's position. Ending without comment avoids setting precedent. Silence protects the structure. The man steps away carrying the weight of the encounter alone. There is no formal record of how it felt, only of what was done. Systems record actions, not experiences. From the outside, the encounter might appear resolved. No arrest, no charges, nothing dramatic. But resolution is not the same as repair. The imbalance remains unaddressed. Authority moves on quickly. Another call, another stop, another moment. Each one isolated, each one defended on its own terms. Patterns are harder to see up close. The street returns to its earlier quiet. The cruiser pulls away. The space opens again. The blockage is gone. The physical trace disappears completely. What lingers is less visible. A recalibration of trust. A reminder of how quickly roles can shift. How easily an ordinary moment can narrow. This encounter did not end in violence. That fact will be cited as success. Calm maintained, control exercised, outcome managed. By those measures, the system worked. But success measured this way ignores the cost borne by the individual. The time lost. The stress absorbed. The message delivered without words. Authority often asserts itself not to punish, but to reaffirm, to remind. To re-establish boundaries when they feel challenged. This encounter serves that function quietly. The man's refusal to comply did not change the system. It did, however, expose its reflexes, the speed at which uncertainty becomes detention. the ease with which procedure fills gaps in justification. There is no single villain in this story. That makes it harder to dismiss. Each action taken can be defended in isolation. Together, they form something heavier. The power of this moment lies in its ordinariness. Nothing extreme was required. No extraordinary measures. Just standard responses applied without pause. When authority encounters resistance that is calm and informed, it often responds not with dialogue, but with containment. Containment resolves the immediate challenge without addressing its cause. The encounter ends without resolution because resolution was never the goal. Control was. Once achieved, the system had no further interest in the exchange. The man leaves knowing more than he did before. Not about law, about limits, about how quickly space can close when expectations are not met. The officers leave knowing their authority remains intact. Unquestioned in practice, even if debated in theory. This is how such moments persist, not through dramatic failure, but through quiet repetition, through encounters that end without consequence, yet leave marks all the same. The street forgets. The system moves on. The memory stays with the one who had the least power to shape the outcome. Nothing about this moment will change policy on its own. It doesn't need to. Its impact lies in accumulation. In how many times it can happen without notice. Control was asserted. The encounter concluded. The balance tipped. Just enough to remind everyone where it rests.